one-stop shop and have the data work together at the best level that we could. In some cases, it's just we've got hard bottom versus seagrass. In other places, we can break out coral reefs, or spur and groove. There are different thematic levels that we can do depending on what data is available. Next slide, please. And so, as this is a living map, we're constantly getting new data. It was a lot of work to put this together in the first place. So, as we're moving forward, where should we be updating the Unified Reef Map? And last year, we spoke with a bunch of the users of this map, a lot of people doing fish and coral surveys. And the emphasis should be on mission and priority-driven updates. So, where do the users want updates? Where are they having issues? And really, it was very similar to the prioritization that this group has done. It's a shallower areas that we don't have mapped yet that we want as the main priorities, and then the deeper reefs are the next step. And then there's some uncertain areas within the mapped region, like patch reefs in the lower keys, that we want to look at. Next slide, please. And here's a good example of our map. And as you can see, a lot of the Dry Tortugas region isn't mapped yet. The Marquesas has a lot of gaps. And then those deep reefs that we know are there, but can't really be surveyed because the surveyors don't really know where to go, are missing. Next slide, please. But as Chris Taylor mentioned, there's a lot of new data coming along. And one of the first updates we're going to make is expand the Dry Tortugas region. So our current map has, this little bit of the Tortugas, but Chris's group has done the habitat classification and more than doubled the size of the data that we're going to have out there. They've already gone through the interpretation. We just need to do the QA/QC to make sure that they match up at the seams. But it looks pretty good just from an overview. Next slide, please. But there's a ton of data that we can include here that hasn't gone through that habitat classification yet. And so we do have some information of those deep reefs. We've got a lot of information in the Marquesas. And so we're going to move into some interpreting some of these products and classifying these habitats. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we need to do that is ground truth data here in the Marquesas because we need to go through that process of interpretation. Next slide, please. So talking about interpretation. So this is one of the PCAs that Chris Taylor's group had put together. This is a bunch of different axes of depth, rugosity, metrics, a ton of different variables that they derived and then ran these PCAs. And these are what they use for segmentation, for automatic classification. And I spent a lot of time working with the different products to segment and classify these. Turned out that outlining this manually is way faster than trying to get the computer to do it. But I'm not trying to do this. I'd like the robots to take care of it for me. So hopefully this gets better. Next slide, please. So it's a little hard to see, but I did run some deep learning algorithms to try to identify these patch reefs. So this is just looking for patch reefs in those areas that are lower confidence. And as you can see, there are a lot of white patches here. These are those turbid areas that are really hard to get LiDAR data for. And a lot of these areas are the places where we have low confidence. What I did here is I manually outlined patch reefs in the middle keys, trained a deep learning model, and then ran that deep learning model on the lower keys and got about 67% accuracy, which is okay. Some of the patch reefs, if I can't really tell whether they are or not, a computer won't be able to if I'm the one that trained it. Next slide, please. So as we're going forward with ground truthing, we want to go back to those end users of these maps. And one of our FWC's big users are the disturbance response monitoring group. They're the ones who are going out and monitoring corals. They go down, do surveys, and these pink dots are all the terminated surveys over the last 5 or 7 years. So there are a lot of places where these users are expecting to find hard bottom and coral, and they don't. So we want to look at what are the characteristics of those sites that make them not match up with our predictions or our maps of what's out there. Next slide, please. And so as we're moving forward with the unified reef map, we want to continue to fill these gaps. We want to use existing multi-beam data of Hawk Channel and the deep reefs and the lower keys. This data collection in deep reefs, as Chris Taylor had mentioned, is continuing throughout Florida's coral reef and up the southeast coast. I haven't talked about that much lately, but there's a lot of valuable information there. And then we've got all the new data that's being collected as part of the FSMI. And so we really want to improve those low certainty areas of the mapped habitats once we start filling in gaps. This is mission-driven prioritization, and we really want to leverage the wealth of existing survey data. There's tons and tons of data coming in, and we want to use that. We don't want to collect any new data ourselves. And then we want to use AI and machine learning to integrate all these different data streams and speed up this classification. Next slide, please. And that's all I've got. I'll be here on the panel if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to invite Anna and Jing back up. Have a seat. And again, the folks from NOAA that presented are online. So if you have questions for any of them, they can turn off their microphones and speak. Renee, were you gonna say that?
Yeah, we have 2 questions online. Is it specific to David?
But they can unmute their mic.
Yeah, we can start with those maybe online questions. If you want to unmute your mics, you're welcome to. Brian Walker. Paging Brian Walker.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there this year. I missed you guys, but thanks for allowing us to attend virtually. I guess for just leading off of what Dave just ended with, one aspect of the seafloor, especially shallow areas throughout the Keys, are this ephemeral nature of seagrass and sedimentation, where large storms can move a lot of this stuff around, changing the habitats constantly. Is there a way that we can build in some sort of certainty or uncertainty based on the habitats of, like, how reliable certain places of the unified reef map might be due to this ephemeral nature, or perhaps the length of time since it was last interpreted?
That's a really good question. And I think previously we haven't had a way to really get after that. But now that we're getting more frequent data collection, there's definitely going to be a way to identify those areas that have changed over time, and add to the metadata. When was the last time this was surveyed? Last time it was updated? What was it previously? What is it now? What is the change of time? That's something that moving forward we can really start thinking about as we get more frequent data collection. But that does require interpreting that new data, which is challenging and time consuming. And so it may not be that those areas get reclassified until we realize that they have low certainty, or it's been a long time since they've been classified.
Is there another question online? Oh, that's it. Okay.
I have one.
Oh, go.
Oh, yeah. My question is for Kate and Mark. So they were online. I'm glad to see that the CMEX catalog is being revived, because the old one was amazing, and it really helped with the searchability. But one thing I was wondering is if it would be possible for people to submit examples of different CMEX categories. So The most obvious is photographs, but also for larger things that like fall in the geoform component, might be examples of what it looks like in multibeam or side scan or even conceptual diagrams. Just so that, sometimes the text can be a bit ambiguous, or especially to somebody that doesn't know a lot of the vocabulary, that could provide like guidance for specific technologies, and especially if you're building up that image library, could feed into those AI tools that have been kind of alluded to during a lot of these talks.
Hey, Alex. Yes, that's definitely something that would be really good to have. And I think so. I think that like if we had sort of like every unit had a set of examples, like an image gallery for something like that, but then also to kind of like build up perhaps separately, more sort of like implementation guidance and like perhaps workflows and things like that, is definitely on the list of things to do. So, and I think sourcing from real world examples from, people like you who have done a lot of work with CMAX. And I don't know, we're also have people in the Great Lakes who are applying CMAX a lot, and perhaps might be interested in contributing some of their imagery and things like that, and really sort of unique classification or unique habitats that are there in the Great Lakes too, that we could kind of pull together into sort of more technical implementation guidance and things like that. So, yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else online? All right, in general, are there any questions or points of important discussion that the audience wants to raise in the room for any of the panelists? Ashley.
So my question is for Anna. And I was really interested in your presentation, and I'm wondering, in your analysis or what you learned from the people that you surveyed, so much of the data that gets collected, certainly by academia, is, grant funded, and there's always a data management plan requirement. And yet somehow by the end of the funding, the data just isn't getting to where it needs to go. And I know you said, 48% or whatever it was. Yeah, we're just running out of funding, but I'm wondering, is it a carrot? Is it a stick? What is it we need? Maybe you're making recommendations in your report for what could be done to have the data stewardship component not be the last thing on the list.
I think there's many ways to go about this. Certainly you could have a stick like holding back a certain amount of funding until that data is published. And I think that would motivate people. I also think that there's just a base education problem that we have, that we teach people how to do R or how to do MATLAB or how to run programs and take in data, but we don't really tell them about the stewardship of collecting data, managing that data, and yet we expect them to write these data management plans and go forward with it. So I think education money for those particular things, like the time and staff limitation, is a real problem. I mean, at the end of the grant, trying to finish getting things going. So I think setting aside money particularly for that, or making sure that it's in your budget, that somehow it's going to be covered at the end, would be interesting, a way to go about it. But yeah, I totally agree with you that there is, especially in the academic world, a huge problem with people saying that they're going to do something and then not having a mandate for them to do it, so they don't do it.
Good question there, Ash. Yep. Wait for the microphone. Yeah. Sorry. Nancy.
This question for Anna. By the way, you did a great job with all the slide excitement. I was just wondering, you were talking about the tools support, you're building tools to support the benthic habitat, and you showed the spatial metadata investigator prototype. What type of testing audience are you looking for, if you are?
Yeah, we're hoping to have a focus group this summer where we can bring, hopefully we'll be able to call on some of you guys to come in and test this, or to not come in, to virtually test the metadata tool and to see kind of where it works and where it doesn't work. But in that survey that you guys have right here is also the question, what tools do you want? Because we're building this metadata tool because we kind of realize that people are having a hard time using metadata standards. But I think that there are other tools out there that would help people standardize both their collection and their ability to put open data out there. So if you have an opinion on other things or functionalities that would be needed within that tool, definitely either write me an email or take the survey.
So we saw in Dave's presentation that a lot of the areas where FSMI is mapping have already been mapped. And Brian brought up that you could look at that and think about error. When you're talking about benthic habitat, we saw in Tampa Bay how important just understanding the changes are in terms of hydrodynamics. But I wonder if anyone in the room is looking at this as an opportunity to really look at changes in the habitat in these maps explicitly, maybe in terms of biological data and all the monitoring that we're seeing in the Keys and on the East Coast.
If there's anyone in the audience that thinks they might be able to address that? I believe though, and I will ask Rick to correct me if I'm wrong, but the FSMI did look at existing data sets, and if they were acquired in a relatively recent time period, they're not recollecting those data. So that's not really answering your question, but it's just kind of making a point about how that program is working. Is that right? Yep. Steve, did you have a question?
I have a comment that's very similar to yours. I mean, I learned from Ashley a long time ago the mantra map once, used many times. But now it seems like when we're accumulating so many 5-year data sets in LiDAR, we have the opportunity to map many times, right? And so this change analysis, I think, is going to be really important, because if we make sure that we calibrate correctly for things like tide stage and whatnot, we're going to see relatively fine scale differences in the bathymetry, which I think Jing showed very clearly. It has the ability to actually change the tide cycle, which is really important, not only for understanding what lies beneath, but also things like piloting large ships through bridges and other things that might be important. So, I do think that with the new Florida data collection scheme in the entirety of the Florida in shallow water, we can compare to a lot of these data sets that the Corps has basically allowed us to gather over time. And so I think understanding those areas that are subject to the greatest change gives us a roadmap to the map once, you map many times places, right? The places where we really need to map multiple times as opposed to just having it. So it was not a question, but yeah.
No, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, I'm going to direct this toward you. Does JOBLTEX not do some sort of change detection or I know you have the Coastal Resilience Index, but do you also do change detection from repeat surveys?
We do, and I have a couple of slides on that in my presentation tomorrow afternoon. We've actually developed a GIS toolbox that kind of standardizes the way we do it. Compute volume change, shoreline change, and elevation change in a systematic way. But we have primarily performed that activity after storm, so pre and post storm volume changes, and not necessarily looking at the whole timeline of data. That's something we need to do.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand not just, the impacts of acute events, but just sort of how things change on a month-to-month or year-to-year at least basis. Kind of have that the background noise amidst the acute impacts. So yeah, that would be a good thesis for somebody. Any other general questions? We have a few thoughts on, of what we wanted to get. We have very different presentations here, from the folks online to the benthic framework, to the modeling, to the LiDAR and the Florida Keys mapping. And some of the questions we're asking, I guess, are, what are some of the challenges that you see in working with the data sets that you're working with? So I'll lob that over there and see if anybody wants to. What are your biggest challenges with the data that you're using? Jing, sure.
I mean, I use the data, right? I don't collect data, so I think sometimes it's hard to get access to the data. So I mean, if we can make the data easy to get and to use, I mean, that will be very useful. The most updated data, yeah. Like for the flooding model, I'm trying to get the data. I mean, I searched for a long time. I get the data I have now, but I still find something is not quite correct, although it can simulate pretty accurate. But if we want to go to the more detail of what about this tree, would it be flood during the hurricane, we still need to have a better access to a better data. Yeah.
So data accessibility is your biggest challenge so far. Okay, Dave, do you want to comment?
Yeah, for me, it's just the diversity of the data that comes through, not just the data collection and the data types, but also the reef is really diverse. The depths, all the hydrodynamic conditions, everything is so diverse. And what might work really well in, the Southeast Florida doesn't work in the Marquesas at all. And the middle keys and lower keys are still pretty different. And just dealing with diversity at all these different scales and different parts of the process is quite challenging. And the dream of automating this, or at least speeding up the process, is going to take a lot of work just because of these challenges.
Anna, anything to add?
I'll just speak to the first thing that comes to mind. I've been helping a student recently with finding the data sources they need. And I think outside of the federal programs, finding the data that's out there and the thing that you need specifically can be very, very difficult and challenging just because of the plethora of places that they could be stored. And there are things like Google data where we can search that now, but it's not always helpful. So I've been thinking a lot about how can we make places that curate data that help you find data that you need for specific topics without being a data repository. So that's my biggest challenge at the moment, or at least the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And that's kind of what goes along with the data accessibility. Maybe the data exists, but you can't find them anywhere, So, and there sure are a lot of places you can imagine. I mean, there's the counties which collect some data and they store it on their website, and then you have states collecting data, and then you get to the feds, and then you have the academics. I don't know what the answer to that one is. That's a pretty tough, pretty tough to get at. So those are some of the challenges. Anybody in the audience want to comment on that? Or add to what are the challenges that you have working with the data that you are working with? Or online? Sure, Rick. Oh.
I think it's for the online.
Oh,
Yeah, so I am not a coral reef expert by any stretch of the imagination, but as one of the firms that's collecting this data, I know because I teach at Nova, and I know a lot of my students have brought up with the El Nino year we've had this last summer, we've had incredible damage to the corals and due to the extreme heat. Is the collections that we're doing right now, is that like just-in-time data for analysis? Like we are gathering this data right after this extremely hot period and the damage that we're seeing. Are you as researchers finding that, would you find that incredibly beneficial for the timing of this? Or is it just, data would be gathered anytime would be useful, but in particular because of what I've heard about the damage that was done last summer.
Panel, care to comment?
Yeah, so hopefully all the coral will come back, right? And it was just a short thing, but I think it's very beneficial for the change analysis. If we have data collected from 2013, 2018, and then now 2024, we should be able to see that change. And hopefully the at the scale that we're that you're collecting data, that we're looking at these reefs, we're not going to be able to see those changes right away, because the erosion is going to take a while. These corals aren't going to just disappear. It'll take time for the dead coral to erode away. So at the scales that we're collecting these data, we may not see it now, but if we're looking at the incremental changes over time and seeing, patch reefs that used to be big are getting smaller, eroding away, or the edges of these aggregate reefs are starting to shrink or, get more homogenized. I think those are the kinds of things we're going to be able to pick up. And so it is really good timing that right after this event where the coral skeletons are probably not gone yet, but this may be the start of just another large scale event where we're losing coral cover. It's very good timing, essentially.
Yeah, and I would think, if nothing else, that it provides a new baseline. So can be used as that baseline for monitoring how well the corals recover or they don't, if that's what would be the case. So, yeah. The question was, do you expect a fair amount of recovery?
I don't know. That's outside my purview. I did see someone from our corals group here, but I think they snuck out. That would be a better question for them.
Do you have a question, Nancy? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just real.
No, it's
real
people
quick,
online.
Rick, yeah, if you have anything that can fill those gaps that we saw in the presentation now, like even if it's raw, ugly, we'll take a look at it, because all those reefs, they determine like how much sampling goes into each strata for the upcoming season, which they're planning now. And that's how we're tracking these impacts. So anything you could do to help, we'd love to talk about it.
We were in the keys section and we were talking a little bit about nuts and bolts of the next step. And so everybody's talking about data accessibility and things that are hard to find. Well, my mind keeps going back to metadata attributes. Is there a plan for any commonality for any type of attributes? Everybody does the date different, the Julian day of year, stuff like that. Is there a plan, or maybe it already is talked about, to have a couple columns of attributes that would help people find data easier? Like I said, it's a nuts and bolt question, but it's pretty important.
Anyone on the panel want to take that?
I think if it all depends on where that data is going. Like each particular place that you're going to put it is going to have a standard that gives you what sorts of formats they want that data in. But I certainly think that's what we're trying to do by getting these expert opinions, is having the ability to say, here's what, as a community, we're kind of agreeing upon as the things that are important to us. And hopefully in that metadata, it'll give you the ability to say like, okay, I need X, Y, and Z then, because this is what the standard recommends. So that is the hope, is that by having those common columns and things like that, it'll be easier for people to compare across data sets.
Sure.
We had some hands go up online. We're going to move to them briefly. You can unmute yourselves. Online questions. There were some hands raised. Chris Taylor. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
And then Katrina, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to add on to the metadata because Yay, metadata. I know it's everyone's worst topic, but it's really important so I work with Co-Survey and we take all the bathymetry and we compile it together. But we need to know, like, not just start and end date and who collected it, like how good is it? Like, how can we use it? What datum was it on? What transformation was done to it? Do we have an estimate on the horizontal and vertical uncertainty? Like, all this goes into the quality and how to do that supersession of like, what is the best available? Like, maybe it's newer, but maybe it doesn't have as good a quality, or maybe it's newer, but it changes so fast in this area that we want to use it anyway, even if the quality is less. So this metadata is crucial for doing that best available bathymetry. And I wanted to also highlight licensing. I know there's a lot of concern with like sharing data, but we're starting to use, or we are using licenses on all data sources coming in. Like, is it in the public domain? Is it CC0 or is it CC BY? Do we have to attribute it? So having a very specific, like, explicit data license on that source allows us to automate it, and it's just very clear, like, this is this so-and-so's data, and this is how we can use it. So I just wanted to highlight, yes, metadata. Are there efforts to standardize it? Yes. We have an external source data team lead, Mia Pavlak, who I think was just up in Boulder with NCI trying to talk through some of that and some other groups that were up there. So I think they're working on it, but I just wanted to harp on metadata. It's not a question, but I appreciate whoever brought it up in the audience because it's super important for me, so thank you.
Thanks for the harp.
And I think Chris Taylor had his hand up.
Hey folks, mostly just a comment. The high resolution topobathy LiDAR and multi-beam bathymetry gives us really good information on the elevation and the complexity of the seabed, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what's there. In the higher resolution we want to get, the more refined image we want to get of the seabed habitats, the benthic communities, the more we're going to need ground truthing and direct observations. And I see a gap related to what Anna talked about. We in NOAA don't have an easy or direct path to archive and to provide metadata for benthic images. And I see that as one of the challenges. And I hope that we can work as a group to overcome that. But just getting enough observations out there to be able to tell us what those things are on the bottom. We've mapped more than once a lot of the coral reefs in the Florida Keys, but we've taken images of a very, very small fraction of those places. And I think we need to establish a bigger campaign to be able to get that done to a sufficiency to fill the gaps that David was talking about earlier today.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, we're pretty much wrapping up here, right? Right, yeah. So does anybody else have any? Yeah, Jeff, I mean, let's keep this discussion going if people have comments.
I guess I had just one question for Jing. Is your TBCOM, are you using structured or unstructured grids? You know, in terms of input and being able to make it more interoperable for you, would it be easier to have, you know, data that's more in a certain format per se? So I'm just curious what you might say about that.
So TBCOM is unstructured grid. So, I mean, I don't have a specific prefer any format, but something like I just need a X, Y, and Z, right? So if I can get a X, Y, and Z in any format, yeah, I can do it. Yeah.
Any last comments or questions for the panel? Oh.
I just add some words to what Jin's response to that question. TBCOM use the unstructured grid model. The model grid size varies from 10 meters or 20 meters in the ship channel and to some 100 meters in the outside area. And to the on the water shelf, it could be as high as 1 kilometer. So those model needs really are not, the resolution of the bathymetry data is not as high as you guys mapped. The model needs it's a lot easier to satisfy, I would say that. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, I think we're gonna wrap up for the day. And thanks for your attention and coming. And is there anyone in this room that does not know where the hub is? Raise your hand. Okay, great. So we're having a mixer at the hub. It starts at 5, so you can either run back to your hotel or socialize in the room, but we'll see you. We'll regather at 5 at the hub and have some drinks. And Rick wants to address the crowd. Wait.
Real quick before you guys depart, those of you that are attached to a sponsor, can you take 5 minutes and meet at the table in the lobby so we can get a picture?
That'd be great.
So I can prove to MTS that this meeting happened. Thank you.